This guy kidnapped his ex-wife along with his current girlfriend, drove across 3 countries with these 2 women, plus 2 kids, his children, one with each of these women. Then he killed both women, buried their bodies in Portugal, and all of this is happening now in 2026. And the way he was caught, by chance, let's say, ended up creating a strong tension between the Portuguese and French justice systems. A conflict that still doesn't have a solution in sight, I would say. But hold on, because this story is full of details and started long before Marcos Campos, and what makes this case complicated isn't just what happened during this trip, okay? It's also what happened before and what's happening now afterwards. Before, because the very woman who helped him escape became one of the victims inside the van, as I said. Afterwards, because there was a 12-year-old boy sitting in the back seat of that van, the man's son, who decided to tell the Portuguese police everything he had seen. And it's exactly this boy's testimony that's at the center of the legal battle going on today between Portugal and France over where this guy will be tried and how long he should stay in prison. But to know everything in detail, we need to go over the facts. To understand this story here, we need to go back a little in time, okay? About 15 years ago, to a rural region in the south of France called Aveyron. Aveyron is in France, in the southern region, as I said, and it's one of the most rural areas in the country with small and relatively isolated towns. That's where, according to the French newspaper Le Dauphiné Libéré, a guy named Cédric Prison went, "Today my throat is going to get sore from talking so much, but hold on." That's where this guy moved to around 2011. Cédric, or Cédric, that's what I'm going to call him, was originally from Haute-Garonne, which is the neighboring region there where Toulouse is located. And at the time of these events, he was in his early 20s. The reason for the move was rugby. That's right, he had been hired by a team from that area to play, but rugby wasn't his main profession, okay? Cédric also served in the Gendarmerie Nationale, which is the French police that works kind of like a military police, operating in rural areas and on the roads. And that was his official profession, let's say, the one he did on a daily basis. And it was during this time, around 2011, that he met a woman named Audrey Cavalet, a local resident from the region. And the two of them started dating, got into a relationship, and they ended up having a child who was named Helio. And it's from this point on that French sources describe the beginning of the deterioration of the relationship, with frequent conflicts over the years, until reaching an episode in 2020 that basically decided the fate of the two in court. Strange, isn't it? The child is born and conflicts begin. Well, that episode in 2020 was a violent argument that happened between the couple, and both of them ended up injured with a knife. He was stabbed a few times in the abdomen and she had a cut on her throat. But obviously, right, these were injuries that weren't life-threatening. So each one gave a different version of what had happened. Cédric said that it was her who tried to kill him and that he had defended himself. Audrey, on the other hand, said that actually he had tried to strangle her first, and what she did was grab a knife to try to defend herself and escape. The case ended up in the French court, and the following year, in 2021, the court convicted both of them of assaulting each other. Cédric was sentenced to 6 months in prison with a suspended sentence, meaning he wouldn't go to jail. Audrey got 8 months, also with a suspended sentence. Both of them left the court without serving a single day in prison, but this conviction didn't calm the situation down, okay? And it was from that point on that Cédric started to build a public persona that would shape the entire case from then on. According to the French newspaper Le Parisien, he published more than 50 videos on YouTube attacking Audrey. Some of them were mentioned by the international press, in which he called her a crazy psychopath, an amnesiac woman, and a stabber protected by the justice system, and an amnesiac criminal to whom they entrusted his son. In other words, he was really pissed off, saying that the woman had made things up, that the justice system fell for her trick, right? According to him, okay guys, and that's why she would have custody of their son. I'd say I'm seeing the link in this chain of everything that's going to happen next, but just look at this. At that point, Cédric was building a narrative of a father wronged by the system and was accusing the court in Rhodes of corruption. He was also part of a Facebook group called Papa en colère, which means angry fathers in a loose translation, okay? And in 2023, he even went on a hunger strike in front of the court in Rodez, along with other fathers who claimed to have been harmed in custody cases. He also took part in protests in front of the city hall in Villefranche-de-Rouergue, a city about 15 kilometers from where Audrey lived. All of this is documented fact reported by the French press, and all of it will serve as background for his decision to do what he did in March 2026. On Audrey's side, her life was actually going in the opposite direction, okay? Because of the intensity of the persecution she was suffering, she had been officially classified by the French system as a victim of ongoing domestic violence. She already had an emergency protection device described by different sources as a panic button or emergency phone, and she was being monitored by Child Protection Social Services. In other words, her case was on the radar of the French protection system with all the resources the system could offer. And even so, the feelings she and her family had, according to interviews given by Audrey's mother to the French press, right, was that this was not enough. The first concrete escalation comes in 2021, although some later sources date the episode to 2022. Anyway, what happened is that when Cedric, during one of the visits he was entitled to make to his son, instead of returning the child at the agreed time, simply took Helio away. He crossed the border into Spain by car and stayed there, hiding with the boy for a few weeks. The French justice system then launched a search, located both of them, and in 2022, Cedric was sentenced to 9 months in prison for this abduction. He served his sentence at the Rodez Detention Center in Aveyron itself and was released in October last year, that is, October 2025. 5 months before what would happen in Portugal. Here is obviously another link in this criminal chain, right? It seems like everything is coming together right in front of our faces, doesn't it? Who helped Cedric? The person who helped Cedric kidnap his own son to Spain wasn't just any accomplice, okay? It was a woman named Angela Legobian, who was Cedric's new girlfriend at that point, and who even stood trial in a French court for her involvement in the kidnapping. I mean, she was involved in crime with him even before the 2026 case, you know. When Cedric left Rodez in October 2025, he and Angela already had a daughter together, a baby daughter, okay? A little girl named Julia, born sometime between 2024 and 2025, and who, in March 2026, was a year and a half old. When everything that happened in the case I'm about to tell you took place, right? But before I go on here, just to give a basic summary of this part, what we have is a couple who got married and had a child. At some point, the relationship, went completely downhill. The argument started. They both stabbed each other. They were sentenced but didn't serve time. The whole thing started when the husband began harassing his wife because she apparently got custody of their son and he wanted custody. And that was the reason, right, why the conflict started. And this went on for 4 or 5 years until the man got together with another woman, got married, or was dating, I'm not sure, and they ended up having a child too. This woman became this man's accomplice in his obsession with going after his ex because of the child he had with his ex. And the whole mess started to take shape, just so you guys have an idea of how complex this case is, okay? But what comes next is straight out of a movie. The date that marks the beginning of the case we're about to learn about is March 20th, 2026, okay? A Friday over there in Aveyron. According to the reconstruction made by the newspaper Noticias ao Minuto, based on sources from the French investigation, the abduction began between the night of the 19th and the early morning of the 20th. In the house where Audrey lived with Helio, her son, and also Cedric's son, there in Saint-Gras, which is in the commune of Veilleur. And when the French police entered the house after receiving the news of the disappearance, they found clear evidence that she had been forced out of the house and had left in a hurry. Because, for example, the shower, right? The shower was on, and several objects were scattered on the floor. And Audrey's own car was found later, about 5 kilometers from the house, parked there on some secondary road, which led the French police to believe that she might have been lured out of the house under some pretext or threat before the abduction actually happened, let's say. On the same day then, in the same area, Angela, Cedric's current girlfriend, was also seen for the last time. I mean, both women, the ex and the current girlfriend, disappeared together on the same day, in the same geographic area. And at some point during those first hours, they were all inside the same car, together with Helio. And Helio, who was 12 years old, and also little Julia, who was a year and a half old. 5 people in total inside that van, two victims, two aggressors, Cedric and his current girlfriend, so they would be the aggressors, or one aggressor and another victim as well anyway. Two victims there, the targets of the kidnapping, which are Audrey and Helio, and also little Julia, who was just a year and a half old, not even aware of the craziness her parents were up to. What is known is that this man drove for many hours with these people inside the van. Reportedly, it was between 1,000 and 1,100 kilometers from Aveyron to the north of Portugal. Then they went from France to Spain, crossed Spain, entered Portugal through the border, and kept going up until they reached the district of Bragança in the northeastern corner of Portugal. To give you a reference for the distance, guys, 1,000 to 1,100 kilometers is about the same as driving from Sao Paulo to Brasilia, for example. But instead of Brazilian scenery, it was 3 European countries in a row. So, at some point during those 1,000 to 1,100 kilometers, the first death happened somewhere along that trip, okay? And here it's important for us to follow what the son himself later told the Portuguese court in testimony preserved for future use, okay? It's a legal procedure where the child's testimony is formally recorded to be used in the case, precisely so they don't have to go through the trauma of testifying multiple times. In other words, they give their testimony there and it's recorded as evidence, so it can be used later in another trial. According to the account from Helio, the 12-year-old boy, at a certain point during the trip, there was an argument between his father and Audrey, and the father killed the mother right there, in front of Angela and the little baby. I mean, Angela saw Audrey being killed, and what came next is one of the most bizarre and disturbing details of the case. Cedric forced Angela to continue the trip with Audrey's body next to her, inside the van. At some point during this next stretch, according to the same statement, the group saw a helicopter flying at low altitude, and Cedric, already pretty paranoid, thought the helicopter was looking for them. How would they even find out he killed the woman in the van? Anyway, the guy got paranoid and thought the helicopter was looking for them, so he stopped the van, got out, and started arguing with Angela. But the helicopter wasn't even from the police, it was just a firefighting aircraft. So the fear was completely unfounded, just a result of his hallucination. But let's say it was the trigger for something irreversible in his mind, or in their minds. Angela, according to what Helio said, asked him to turn himself in right there and threatened to report him if he didn't do it. It was at that moment that Cedric killed Angela too with a chokehold, actually by strangulation, right? Probably a chokehold, right? Manual strangulation there on the neck. The autopsies later performed by the Portuguese police confirmed asphyxiation as the cause of death for both victims. So, with both women dead and the two children still inside the car, Cedric kept driving through northern Portugal until he reached a mountain range in the district of Bragança called Serra da Nogueira, which is a mountainous and rural region in northern Portugal. He stopped in that mountain range and buried both bodies. In that mountain range, according to the sources, the ground was very sandy, which made digging easier, and the bodies were not placed deep in the woods. They were buried there about 10 meters from a road. And what makes this moment even more disturbing is that Cedric didn't hide the burial from his son. According to the Portuguese investigation, he forced Helio to watch over the burials there at the site. The 12-year-old boy was forced to witness his father bury his mother and stepmother. Well, it's not easy, it's even hard to comment on. At this point in the trip, Cedric had already killed two women, buried both of them, and had his son alive as a direct witness to everything that had happened. There was also a 1.5-year-old baby girl in the car, and he was carrying with him fake documents, an unregistered gun, 17,000 euros in cash, so basically he was kind of prepared to run away. But instead of actually running away, right, he just kept driving around the north of Portugal for almost 4 more whole days. He kept driving around on different roads, ate, slept in his own vehicle, and it's not really clear what his plan was at that moment, if he even had one, right? But later during the interrogation, and I'll get to that part in a moment, okay, he gave his own version to the investigators about what he was trying to do. During 4 days in northern Portugal, on the night of Tuesday, March 24, 2026, Cedric's van appeared on National Road 102 in Longroiva. That's in the municipality of Meda, and it's a rural region near the border with Spain. Okay, guys? It was on that road that night that two officers from the Portuguese National Republican Guard, the GNR, were carrying out a routine road inspection operation. Kind of like our police checkpoint, you know? So the operation didn't have a specific target, just like a checkpoint, really. They were stopping cars there randomly to check documents and so on. But with that car on that night, the stop didn't end in seconds, okay? They stopped the car, which was supposed to be a quick check, right? Just documents and all. It revealed something bizarre, right? When the officers checked the documents presented by the driver, they identified that the documents were fake. From there, they searched the vehicle, and during the search, they found a series of items that pointed to much more than just simple document forgery. An unlicensed firearm, several license plates kept inside the van, more documents that appeared to be fake, and 17,000 euros in cash. So the police there, detained Cedric, arrested him right there, caught in the act for the crimes of document forgery and illegal possession of a firearm. But the case still had two more layers to unfold, didn't it? The first was the fact that there were two children inside the car, a 12-year-old boy and a baby girl, with neither of their mothers present. And the second, the result of checking the detainee's name in international systems showed that Cedric was listed there by the French authorities as a suspect in serious crimes, including kidnapping and suspected homicide. The GNR then immediately called the Portuguese Judicial Police, which is their equivalent of what we know here as the Federal Police. Not in Brazil, though. And, according to the official statement from the GNR, a joint analysis between this agency and the Judiciary Police pointed to a strong possibility of double homicide. And during this initial investigation, it was Cedric's eldest son, Helio, who gave the Portuguese investigators the missing information. He described what he saw on the trip, explained what happened to his mother and stepmother, and pointed out the exact place where the bodies had been buried. The judicial police then went there to Serra da Nogueira, right in the district of Bragança, and found the two bodies buried, exactly where the boy described, about 100 kilometers from the place where the checkpoint was set up, where the father had been detained with the bus ticket. Two days after the arrest, on March 26th, Cedric was taken for the first judicial interrogation at the court of Vila Nova de Foscoa in the district of Guarda, there in Portugal. His arrival at the court shows the impact that the case already had in Portugal. Security measures were reinforced with military personnel at the main entrance and also at the back entrance of the building. Locals who had gathered there were shouting, right, repeatedly, "Murderer!" The interrogation lasted about 7 hours. The judge did not allow him to veer off into other topics, and around 10:30 at night, the decision came. And it was precisely during this interrogation that Cedric made the confession we need to understand his version of the case. He admitted to killing the two women, but denied that he had premeditated the two murders. He told investigators that the original goal of Audrey's abduction was to force her to sign a document giving custody of Helio to him. In other words, the son who was, as I said, let's say, the trigger for everything, right? There, 4 or 5 years of study, and he also said that his plan after that was to cross Portugal with the children to get to Morocco. According to his version, Audrey would be left behind on this journey alive. As for Angela, he didn't specify to investigators what he intended to do. He only admitted that when he arrived in Portugal, things with his girlfriend kind of heated up there and he ended up strangling her. That's Cedric's version, okay? It's up to the Portuguese court to decide how credible it is and how much it matches the material evidence and the son's testimony, who is an eyewitness, right? So, the Portuguese judge ordered preventive detention, and Cedric was charged with 8 crimes in total: kidnapping, 2 counts of homicide, 2 counts of desecration of a corpse, and domestic violence. And this last one, okay, it wasn't against both women, alright? It was against his own little baby Julia, who, according to the prosecution, was a victim of ongoing domestic violence for being dragged along during this whole escape, which is a disgusting act of cowardice, isn't it? And also the crime of document forgery and illegal possession of a weapon. Cedric was transferred to the Guarda prison facility, and the judge also ruled that he was forbidden from having any contact with his two children, even through third parties. The two children were first taken to a shelter in Portugal, and then they were repatriated to France with the expectation that they would remain under the care of the French state until a family member could take custody. And the most likely scenario is that they will end up being separated because they have different maternal families. With Cedric in custody, the bodies found, the children repatriated, and the Portuguese case underway, it seemed like the case was heading for a normal trial, right? But that's where the legal tangle comes in, which is still causing diplomatic friction between Portugal and France to this day. Still in March, the French justice system issued a European arrest warrant against Cedric, which is a legal instrument used between countries in the European Union, right? For one country to formally request another to hand over a person to be tried there. France wanted to try Cedric on French soil based on French law, and the arguments from the French side were strong. He is a French citizen. Both victims were French citizens. The son, right, who witnessed everything, is a French citizen. The kidnapping started there in France, and the maximum sentence for aggravated murder in the French system can be life imprisonment. And the maximum sentence for this type of crime in Portugal can be up to 25 years. And the lawyer for Audrey's mother publicly argued in an interview that even though the crimes were committed in Portugal, it would make legal sense for Cedric to be tried in France. But on May 8, 2026, the Court of Appeal of Coimbra in Portugal made a decision. They refused to execute the European warrant. The decision was reportedly based on two legal points provided for in the Portuguese law of judicial cooperation. The first is that Portuguese law allows the refusal to surrender a person when there is already a pending criminal case in Portugal for the same facts, right? And there was right because the case in Portugal against Cedric was already underway. And the second is that the law also allows refusing extradition when the crime, in part or in whole, was committed on national territory. And since both homicides, both burials, and the desecration of the bodies happened in Portugal, the court found that the case fell under Portuguese jurisdiction. What this decision means in practice is that the man who killed two French women and buried their bodies there in Portugal will be tried under Portuguese law, subject to Portugal's maximum sentence. And if convicted, he will serve his sentence there in Portugal and not in France. And Cedric Prison is currently 42 years old. The maximum sentence he can get in the Portuguese system, as I said, is 25 years. In the French system, he would be subject to a potentially longer sentence, right? Life imprisonment. Whether he would actually serve a life sentence is another story. But what happens is that this issue, right, about Portugal has made the victims' families really angry because they feel that the sentence there might be too lenient for what he did. And this is the point where I want to hear from you. Do you think it's fair for him to be tried in Portugal where the crime happened and ended, or should he be sent to France where he and the victims were born to face a harsher sentence? Comment below because this is the same fight that's happening right now between the two judicial systems. And don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel because there are 3 episodes every week. Today, in mid-May 2026, Cedric is still in pretrial detention at the facility over in Portugal. The Portuguese investigation is still open in cooperation with the French authorities. The defense can still try to appeal, okay? France might try other legal avenues for a future transfer. Although after that decision from the judicial system over in Coimbra, Portugal, it's kind of hard for that to happen. Helio and Julia, the 2 children, are in France, still under state custody, and their future will depend on whether different maternal relatives step forward to take custody of each child. What's certain is that this case could still have many chapters, okay? But what can be said based on what has been found out so far is that the whole sequence was only discovered because of a random police checkpoint. They randomly picked Cedric's van to pull over on a road in the countryside of Portugal one night in March. And because a brave 12-year-old boy decided to report everything his miserable father did, right? Look at the mess this guy made because he wanted custody of his son, and what a senseless, conflict-driven crime, right, guys? A family crime here, where conflict prevails, where people who supposedly loved each other enough to have a child at some point, then the child is born, out of nowhere an argument starts, they start accusing each other, stabbing each other, it turns into a mess, and it ends up in a deplorable situation like this, where the ones who really pay the price are the 2 kids, right? who will now grow up without their mothers and likely without their father too, right? He'll be in prison, and these two children will carry that burden throughout their development, having a father who murdered their mothers. Very unfortunate, right? That's it. Thanks again for your company. See you, Behoroi. Until next time.